When we think of ancient history, it is easy to remember ancient civilizations such as the Romans and the Egyptians. But we often forget that there were ancient peoples living in the Americas around the same time. Thus, we will begin this lecture by studying these ancient Americans. Europeans call the Americas the New World, based on the notion that North and South America was an untouched and undisturbed landscape before Europeans. But for the millions of Native Americans Europeans encountered, it was anything but. Today, there is evidence that suggests that humans have lived in the Americas for over 10,000 years. Moreover, these humans were dynamic, diverse, they spoke hundreds of languages, and created thousands of distinct cultures. Prior to colonization, Native Americans built settled communities and followed seasonal migration patterns, maintained peace through alliances, warred with their neighbors, developed self-sufficient economies, and maintained vast trade networks. How do we know this? Because there is enough archaeological evidence that tells us that is the case. Archaeologists and historians share a desire to learn about people who lived in the past, but they employ different methods to obtain information. Archaeologists depend on physical objects for their evidence, including bones, spear points, pots, baskets, jewelry, clothing, and buildings. Historians rely on written records, including personal and private documents, such as letters and diary entries, and a variety of public documents, such as laws, speeches, newspapers, and court cases. The use of writing distinguishes the chronological periods and the people studied by archaeologists from those studied by historians. Although there is enough archaeological evidence to confirm the existence of ancient Americans, how and when they arrived to the Western Hemisphere is still a subject of debate. To be honest, there is still a lot that we do not know and a lot yet to be discovered about these ancient civilizations. Nevertheless, one of the most compelling arguments of how these ancient people arrived to the Western Hemisphere is that while massive geological forces separated North and South America from other continents for hundreds of years, a pathway emerged during the last global cold spell when snow piled up in glaciers, causing sea levels to drop and thus exposing a land bridge hundreds of miles wide called the Bering that connected Asian Siberia to American Alaska. It is speculated that the first ancient Americans crossed this passage. Archaeologists refer to these migrants as Paleo-Indians. Although this is subject to debate, Paleo-Indians are considered by many to be the first ancient Americans. Their name, Paleo, means very old. There is some evidence that states that Paleo-Indians were from African and Asian origins. There's also some evidence that suggests that they were hunters and that after crossing the Bering, they probably traveled through the eastern side of the Canadian Rockies in pursuit of abundant large game. Or travel by boat down the Pacific coast. It is speculated that the Siberian hunters travel in small bands of no more than 25 people. It is estimated that their migration throughout the Western Hemisphere took about 1,000 years. Paleo-Indians used distinctive spearheads known as Clovis Points to mostly hunt large animals, which provided the first Americans with abundant food and material for clothing and shelter. Archaeologists have discovered Clovis Points throughout North and Central America in sites occupied between 13,500 BP and 13,000 BP. Around 11,000 BP, Paleo-Indians confronted a major crisis. The mammoth and other major mammals they hunted became extinct. The extinction of the mammoth forced the Paleo-Indians to make changes and adapt to their new environment. Archaeologists use the term Archaic to describe the many different hunting and gathering cultures that came after the big game hunting Paleo-Indians. In the long period when those cultures dominated ancient American history, which is roughly between 10,000 BP to somewhere between 4,000 BP and 3,000 BP. Because of the extinction of the mammoth, archaic people devoted more energy to foraging, collecting wild plant food such as roots, seeds, nuts, and berries. Many of these cultures persisted in North America long after European colonization. Despite being mobile, archaic people recognized distinct places as theirs for use during certain seasons. Archaic hunter and gatherers people were incredibly diverse, each with distinct cultures and languages. Archaeologists divide these cultures as the Great Plain Bison hunters, Great Basin cultures, Pacific Coast cultures, and Eastern Woodland cultures. Today you are briefly going to learn about these ancient Americans and the legacy they left behind. After most large game became extinct, some hunters concentrated on bison herds that grazed the plains stretching east of the Rocky Mountains. These hunters, who moved constantly to maintain contact with their prey, developed trapping techniques that made it easier to kill large numbers of animals, and used Folsom Points, named after a site near Folsom, New Mexico, to hunt bison. Around AD 500, bows and arrows reached Great Plain hunters, allowing them to wound their prey from farther away and making it easier to shoot repeatedly. These hunters did not alter age-old techniques of bison hunting on foot until the Spanish arrived and introduced domesticated horses after 1492. Archaic peoples in the Great Basin inhabited a region of great environmental diversity that share the characteristic of unpredictable rainfall. To ensure adequate amounts of food year-round, Great Basin peoples hunted game but mostly rely on plants that could be stored for later consumption. The richness of the natural environment made present-day California the most densely settled and culturally diverse area in ancient North America. California cultures, including the Chumash, share the hunter-gatherer way of life and a reliance on acorns as a major food source. The Pacific Northwest coast provided its inhabitants who lived in relatively permanent villages a rich, natural environment replete with a variety of foods. East of the Mississippi River, Archaic peoples adapted to a forest environment that included many local variants. Woodland hunters stacked deer as their most important prey and, like all Archaic peoples, gathered edible plants, seeds, and nuts. Around 4000 BP, woodland cultures added two important features to their basic lifestyle: agriculture and pottery. These new features came with newcomers who had migrated north from Mesoamerica. Despite cultural changes brought on by the introduction of agriculture and pottery, ancient woodland Americans retained basic features of their hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Among eastern woodland peoples and most other late Archaic cultures, agriculture supplemented but did not replace hunter and gatherer subsistence strategies. However, around 4000 BP, distinctive Southwestern cultures began to depend on agriculture, and around 2500 BP, woodland people began to construct burial mounds. The size and complexity of the burial mounds suggest the existence of a social and political hierarchy that archaeologists term a chiefdom, which could have commanded a large labor force. Between 2500 BP and 2100 BP, the Adena people, centered in Ohio, built hundreds of burial mounds containing a variety of grave goods. About 2100 BP, the Adena culture evolved into the Hopewell culture, which constructed even larger burial mounds and filled them with even more elaborate goods than their Adena predecessors. The Hopewell culture declined around AD 400 for reasons that are obscure. Archaeologists speculate that bows and arrows, along with increasing reliance on agriculture, made small settlements more self-sufficient and therefore less dependent on the central authority of the Hopewell chiefs. "400 years after the Hopewell decline, the Cahokia emerged. The Cahokia are known for building spiritual mounds and for their elaborate rituals. The city itself spanned 2,000 acres and centered on Monk's Mound, a large earthen hill that rose 10 stories and was larger at its base than the pyramids of Egypt. The Cahokians were politically organized around chiefdoms, a hierarchical clan-based system that gave leaders both secular and sacred authority. In what used to be their city, archaeologists have found large plazas that were used for religious and political ceremonies. Around 1050 AD, Cahokian population grew almost 500% in only one generation, and new groups were absorbed into the city and its supporting communities. By 1300 AD, the once powerful city had undergone a series of strains that led to its collapse. Scholars previously pointed to an ecological disaster or slow depopulation through immigration, but new research instead emphasizes mounting warfare and internal political tensions as a possible cause for their collapse. Facing unpredictable rainfall and dry climates that made wild plant food supplies unreliable, ancient Americans in the Southwest developed cultures characterized by agriculture and multi-unit dwellings called pueblos. After 3500 BP, corn became the most important cultivated crop for ancient Americans. Reliance on corn encouraged Americans in the Southwest to become irrigation experts and limit their migratory habits in order to tend to the crop. The first Southwestern people we are going to discuss today include the Mogollon, the Anasazi, and the Cahokia. About AD 200, small farming settlements began to appear throughout the Southwest, marking the emergence of the Mogollon culture. Known for their pit houses, which were the precursors to ceremonial kivas, Mogollon culture began to decline about AD 900. Around AD 500, other ancient peoples migrated from Mexico to southern Arizona and established Cahokian settlements. The Cahokia adopted Mexican platform mounds and ball courts. They also rely heavily on sophisticated irrigation systems until their decline in about AD 1400. North of the Mogollon and Honokam cultures, the Anasazi culture began to flourish around AD 100. Beginning around AD 1000, some Anasazi began to move to large multi-story cliff dwellings, while others erected huge stone wall pueblos with enough rooms to house everyone in the settlement. Persistent drought in the region forced the Anasazi culture to abandon their large pueblos around AD 1200. The Hopi, Zuni, and Acoma Indians are descendants of the Anasazi. Some of the most impressive pueblos built by the Southwestern cultures include Pueblo Bonito. Pueblo Bonito once stood 4 or 5 stories tall and housed more than 600 rooms. That is all for now, but make sure you watch the next lecture. In it, you will learn about Native American culture and life right before colonization.